Gaudete, gaudete, Christus es natus, ex Maria Virgine gaudete.
Welcome to the Rediscovery channel. This is the channel where I, Ivor Kovac, and my good friend Stilgar take turns coming up with topics from history that the other person doesn't know about and often hasn't heard about. And today it is my turn, and I've got something that you probably have heard of before. I want to actually talk about the sermon that Paul preached to the Athenians, which you can find in Acts 17. Are you familiar with that, Stilgar?
I have to be honest and say probably, but I don't know it, like what's in it like that. But maybe you should begin, and then I'll probably recognize things.
Okay, well, I do want to read the passage, but I'm actually going to save that for the end. But basically, to summarize, it's the sermon where Paul goes into Athens, and he's looking around, and there's shrines to all the different gods, the Greek gods, and then there's a shrine for the unknown God. And when he preached his sermon, he said, "I'm here to tell you about the unknown God." And it says that some of the people thought he was a fool and others believed him. So do you recall that at all?
Yes. Yeah.
So did you ever stop to think of why it is these people found that persuasive and why they believed him?
Yeah, I always just assumed that he was doing this because, right, they were so religious that they wanted to make sure that they had every all their bases covered, and that this was a reason for them to listen to what he had to say.
So would that have worked on you if you were one of those people?
If I was a Greek, ancient Greek, yeah, maybe, because they were probably also very superstitious, I imagine. So could have been a reason to be like, okay, yeah, the unknown God, tell me more. So potentially, yeah.
Yeah. The thing is, when I read that as a kid and also as an adult, I had the feeling that there's more to it than what it says. Like maybe we don't have all the information to know why that argument was persuasive to them. But I actually, in the course of just reading and doing research for this channel and reading for fun, I came across some information that I think I've come across the reason why Paul was able to persuade them with that argument. So it actually starts with Plato, which I'm sure you've heard of him before. Famous Greek philosopher, and he was born either in 428 or 427 BC, and then he died in 348 or 347, not completely sure. And Plato, he was a student of Socrates and the teacher of Aristotle, and he talked about a lot of things, including Atlantis. He is the only written source for the Atlantis legend, and we talked about that in the other video, of course, a while ago. Anybody can go back and see that if they want to. He also talked about the 4 elements that the Greeks believed in and the structure of the universe, which later on the Catholic Church would adopt, and it would just become the official science and church establishment view for cosmology. So he founded the Academy of Athens, and the classes that they originally covered were mathematics, dialectics, natural science, and politics, or rather training people to get into politics. And the academy that he started would be there for centuries until Justinian was ultimately the one who closed it down. But so the other video where I talked about Atlantis, all the information about Atlantis, the description and the story of how it was destroyed and everything, comes from the Timaeus and Critias Dialogues by Plato. And most of the information about Atlantis comes from Critias, which is the second dialogue. The first dialogue is Timaeus. So the purpose of these dialogues, basically, and this is probably one of the part of one of the courses that he taught originally, thousands of years ago. But the Timaeus dialogue mainly was supposed to talk about physical science and the structure of the universe as well as the origin. And the Critias dialogue was the history of Atlantis and to some extent Athens. So I want to read some parts of the Timaeus dialogue so you can kind of see where these guys are coming from, because he does talk about the unknown God, and you'll see what this was here. So this to begin with. Okay, page 16. I'm not going to read the whole thing, obviously. Anybody can do that if they want to get everything. But just some of the spots that are relevant. So here from the Critias dialogue, or sorry, from the Timaeus dialogue, he talks about the universe. I'm just going to read some of it here. So our starting point lies, I think, in the following distinction. What is it that always is, but never comes to be? And what is it that comes to be, but never is? The former, since it is always consistent, can be grasped by the intellect with the support of a reasoned account, while the latter is the object of belief, supported by unreasoning sensation, since it is generated and passes away, but never really is. Now, anything created is necessarily created by some cause, because nothing can possibly come to be without there being something that is responsible for its coming to be. And then, I've actually used arguments like this before, in discussions about the universe, myself.
Yeah,
But moving,
it was part of the I think most Greek philosophers, instead of Plato's teacher Socrates, believed that that at the beginning there was a god, as that would follow logically, looking at the evidence before them, or just looking at the logos, at reasoning. So
yeah,
I
the
think
Greeks, the Greeks used to debate this kind of stuff. There are different schools of thought. They debated things like whether the Earth was the center of the universe or the sun, and also what role the gods play, and whether or not they played any role at all. But yeah, Plato, he talks about this is kind of laying the foundation for the unknown God, because the Greeks had lots of gods, but none of the gods that they have by name, like Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Mercury, so on and so forth, none of them is responsible for the creation of the universe, and they knew it. So, moving on a little bit, he also says here, the whole universe or world, or whatever, let it be called by whatever term it finds acceptable. Well, the first question to be asked about it is the perennial first and fundamental question. Did it always exist? In which case, it was not created and has no beginning. Or has it come to be? In which case, there was something that began it in the first place. It has come to be. After all, it is visible, tangible, and corporeal, and everything with these properties is perceptible. And we have already demonstrated that everything perceptible, which is to say everything that is grasped by belief with the support of sensation, is subject to creation and belongs to the class of things that have come to be. Now, we've already said that anything created is necessarily created by some cause, but it would be a hard task to discover the maker and father of this universe of ours, and even if we did find him, it would be impossible to speak of him to everyone. So this is kind of where they say, we cannot, we don't know who he is, and we can't really know him. And I want to move along here a little bit. So he also talks about the personality of the creator. And what he says is, I should explain then how this created universe came to be made by its maker. He was good, and nothing good is ever characterized by mean-spiritedness, over anything, being free of jealousy. He wanted everything to be as similar to himself as possible. Wise men tell us that there is no more important precondition for the created world than this, and we could not go wrong if we were to accept it, for the God wanted everything to be good, marred by as little imperfection as possible. He found everything visible in a state of turmoil, moving in a discordant and chaotic manner, so he led it from chaos to order, which he regarded as in all ways better. And then he also talks about time, which is a dimension. We know today it is a dimension. It's a dimension of our universe, just as much as up, down, forwards, backwards. So Plato also had something to say about that, which I thought was kind of interesting. He says, and this is regarding time, but the being that served as the model was eternal, and it was impossible for him to make this altogether an attribute of any created object. Nevertheless, he determined to make it a kind of moving likeness of eternity. And so in the very act of ordering the universe, he created a likeness of eternity, a likeness that progresses eternally through the sequence of numbers, while eternity abides in oneness. This image of eternity is what we have come to call time, since along with the creation of the universe, he devised and created days, nights, months, and years, which did not exist before the creation of the universe. They are all parts of time, and was and will be are created aspects of time, which we thoughtlessly and mistakenly apply to that which is eternal. For we say that it was, is, and will be, but in fact only is truly belongs to it, while was and will be are properties of things that are created and that change over time, since was and will be are both changes. What is forever consistent and unchanging, however, does not have the property of becoming older or younger with the passage of time. It was not created at some point. It has not come into existence just now, and it will not be created in the future. As a rule, in fact, none of the modifications that belong to the things that move about in the sensible world are a result of having been created, should be attributed to it. They are aspects of time as it imitates eternity and cycles through the numbers. So yeah, you can see probably how some of the stuff that we read in the New Testament is addressed towards these people. And of course, the New Testament was written in Greek originally. And last thing I want to read here from Plato is what he says about the Greek gods. That we still, probably today, there's very few people, if anyone at all, that believes in the Greek pantheon. But at least in America, for my lifetime, it's something that kept coming up in our entertainment again over and over again. Like you have movies going back to early 20th century, like Hercules Unchained, and you have the Hercules series with Kevin Sorbo that I liked when I was a kid. I had to read Edith Hamilton's mythology in middle school, and also a lot of this stuff is in Marvel Comics too. So it's definitely still got a little bit of cultural relevance, maybe not as much now as it used to in the past, but a lot of people are still familiar with this stuff. So here's what Plato said regarding the Greek gods that the people were worshiping. As for all the other divinities, it's beyond our abilities to understand and explain their creation, so we had better trust the accounts of our predecessors, who were, or so they claim, descendants of the gods, and can therefore be expected to know all about their forefathers. There is no way for us not to believe the gods' children, even when what they say is implausible and illogical. No, we must follow custom and trust their claim to be proclaiming matters that are familiar to them. So let's accept their account of the creation of these gods and simply repeat it. Earth and heaven gave birth to Oceanus and Tethys, who in their turn were the parents of Phorcys, Cronus, Rhea, and all the gods of that generation. Then from Cronus and Rhea came Zeus, Hera, and all those well-known beings who are said to be their siblings. and who then gave birth to further offspring. So basically, that all the Greeks knew that the gods that they worshipped they had different domains, like they were in charge of different things. Like you had Hades in charge of the dead, Demeter in charge of the harvest, Poseidon in charge of the ocean, but none of these gods there were the creator, and they knew it. So the creator, at least in the philosophy, those that follow Plato, was the unknown God, like he said right there at the beginning. So, when I was reading all this stuff, I thought, oh, okay, now I know what the background is when Paul came to talk to them, right? So it makes a lot more sense. And the last thing I want to do is actually read the account of it, which can be found in Acts chapter 17, 18 through 34. So I'm just going to read that, and then we can discuss it. So here it says, okay. Then certain philosophers of the Epicureans and of the Stoics encountered him, and some said, "What will this babbler say?" Others, some said, "What will?" Okay. Others, some. He seemeth to be a setter forth of strange gods, because he preached unto them Jesus and the resurrection. And they took him and brought him unto the Areopagus, saying, May we know what this new doctrine whereof thou speakest is. For thou bringest certain strange things to our ears. We would know therefore what these things mean. For all the Athenians and strangers which were there spent their time in nothing else but either to tell or to hear some new thing. Then Paul stood in the midst of Mars Hill and said, Ye men of Athens, I perceive that in all things ye are too superstitious. For as I passed by and beheld your devotions, I found an altar with this inscription, To the unknown God, whom therefore ye ignorantly worship. Him I declare unto you, God that made the world and all things therein, seeing that he is Lord of heaven and earth, dwelleth not in temples made with hands, neither is worshipped with men's hands, as though he needed anything, seeing he giveth to all life and breath and all things, and hath made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on all the face of the earth, and hath determined the times before appointed and the bounds of their habitation, that they should seek the Lord, if haply they might feel after him and find him, though he be not far from every one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as certain also of your own poets have said, for we are also his offspring. For as much then as we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think that the Godhead is like unto gold or silver or stone, graven by art and man's device. And the times of this ignorance God winked at, but now commandeth all men everywhere to repent, because he hath appointed a day in which he will judge the world in righteousness by that man whom he hath ordained, whereof he hath given assurance unto all men, and that he hath raised him from the dead. And when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, and others said, We will hear thee again of this matter. So Paul departed from among them, howbeit certain men clave unto him and believed, among the which was Dionysius the Areopagite, and a woman named Damaris, and others with them. So I'm sure you can see now that just from what I read, he is basically appealing to the things that Plato said about how the universe was made and who is responsible for making it, and how he went about it. And I didn't read everything, Plato, he talks a lot more about it than those few snippets that I read. One of the things he talks about is that he created the universe as a perfect sphere because there's no shape more perfect, and he set its bounds, and he is outside of the physical universe, not a part of it. Like Zeus is a part of the universe. He is immortal, but he's not eternal. He has a beginning, and he runs the weather basically. He's also like the administrator, the main administrator for the Greek pantheon. So, yeah, I thought, when I was reading the Timaeus dialogue, I said, man, now I get why they were ready to listen to Paul, because he's telling them about stuff that they had learned at their Academy of Athens. And also, the Bible talks about it when God, on the first day of creation, he made the earth. It was void and without form, which is also something Plato said, that it was chaotic and he provided order to it. So, yeah, right? I mean, there is a context to it that we in the, now the 21st century don't know. Like the average person doesn't know it. But, Paul, he was very well read. He knew all this stuff. And he was basically crafting arguments based upon that. He wasn't like some Jehovah's Witness or Mormon that just shows up at your door and tries to get you to believe this stuff without really providing an argument, or like Muslims who don't really provide an argument either. The argument for that is believe it or else.
Yeah, well, actually, I think a lot of Muslims also try to get arguments, but oftentimes they're based on false premises, unfortunately.
Yeah.
They'll be using taqiyya which is like lying in the name of their religion to try and convert you. But yeah, that's not what Paul was doing here, obviously. So he was using intellect to try, yeah. So it's a good, interesting. I never thought about this, so I knew it was Paul was very well read, especially when it came to Jewish law. But apparently, he was also very well versed in Greek philosophy as well. Then, so
yeah, he definitely used his target audience. And if you want to persuade somebody and actually have success, you can't use emotional arguments. You have to get your foot in the door somehow. So with the Jews, he would recite scripture from the Old Testament, and with the, when he was visiting the Greeks, he would appeal to other things like Plato, who had said, the God that made the universe did it this way and this way and this way. So, yeah,
it's also
that's why
something classic teacher move is to point out the unknown God. It's kind of like walking into the classroom, having an example of the topic you're going to talk about. It's like a classic history teacher move to me. But yeah, interesting story.
Yeah, not a very big topic, but I thought it was worth sharing. It's amazing how much stuff you can come across when you just read books. You can learn a lot more from opening up a book and reading it than you can from a TikTok video or a tweet. It's good to have a longer attention span. It's good to read history and to open books. It's good to have physical books because they still work even when your power goes out. And it's much tougher for the corporation to repossess your book once it's in your hands. So, yeah, I mean, I would just encourage everybody who is listening to us to also read. And, there's some other stuff too, coming to Paul when he was also in Jerusalem, where they finally captured him. He said, I'm in trouble because I am a Pharisee. And he was a Pharisee, he said, like, when I first read that, I was like, so what? But the Pharisees, they believe in the resurrection, and the Sadducees did not. And I could do a whole nother topic on that, actually, but the Jews that we have today, that are in this world today, they all come from the Pharisees philosophically, because the Sadducees, that whole religious school, died when the temple was destroyed. But that's why he said, I'm here because I'm a Pharisee. So he immediately connects with half the people that are there, maybe give or take half the people that are there. And he was originally that, before he became a Christian. But he says, I'm here because I believe I'm in trouble because I believe in the resurrection of the dead. And then when he said that, immediately he played up on that schism, and he had all the Pharisees arguing with the Sadducees and defending him, even though they didn't really want to. But he knew his audience. So, but
Yeah. So that's a good tip.
yeah.
Read more.
Read more. Reading is your friend.
Yeah, read more books. I'd never heard of Plato's Timaeus before. So interesting.
Yeah, a lot of the information.
I have the Republic of Plato, but in hard copy. But yeah, it's a bit dry to read. I think this is actually a much more interesting subject in my opinion. So
Yeah, Plato. I also have Plato's Republic, and I haven't started reading it yet. I think philosophically, some of his ideas are kind of weird. Now, some of them I agree with, and I think are very logical, like how he talks about the creator being outside the universe and being eternal, and the way he expresses time as a reflection of eternity and stuff like that. But then some of his political ideas are kind of goofy, like the idea that half the army should be female. I mean, there's a reason why you don't want women to serve in the army. Sometimes you have to. If you're a small culture surrounded by enemies, you have small territory like Israel, and you have enemies breaking in. And there are times in history where women have had to, in emergencies, had to partake in the defense of the city or the structure or whatever. But you don't want this to be a common practice, because, if your female population gets decimated, then your population gets decimated, because you need the women to.
Not everybody needs to be in the military. I think a good reason for women to be in the military would be for them to get more versed in the reality of and the harshness of society. I think it could be a good thing. Because
Well,
often what you see is with a lot of women, if they get the right to vote, is that they're very soft and like they don't, well, in a good way, is that they don't expect anything bad, and they're just trusting towards others, and having military experience might change your perspective a little bit. So anyway,
yeah,
but
I think,
that's a whole nother discussion.
yeah. So
Yeah.
maybe someday, I mean, we could probably do lots of topics just on Plato and all the things that he said. Maybe someday I'll get around to reading the Republic and doing something like that, or maybe just doing a video on his life and philosophy in general. But I just wanted to share this one because, when I read that, it kind of clicked into place and answered some questions for me.
I
About
never thought about that. That's interesting. Yeah.
they're already primed. I wonder what he would have said if he had gone to China or India, what kind of sermon he'd give there. That'd be interesting to see. Probably appeal to Confucius. He was in China, because actually the Confucius, the Analects of Confucius are very, very similar to what the Bible teaches, in terms of how you ought to behave. And in China, they have this thing called the Temple of Heaven. And when they translate, now I know this is anecdotal, but supposedly when they translate the Bible into Mandarin, the word they use for God is Tian, which is the Chinese, the supreme deity for ancient China. And he was the one that they would worship at the Temple of Heaven, and supposedly is the creator, and also the one that ordains the emperors and then withdraws their right to rule, the mandate of heaven. He gives it and takes it. Chinese philosophy is also very interesting, and Chinese
That's
history.
interesting. I don't know anything about that. As in Qian, as in Tiananmen Square? Or?
Tien, Tien, Tien.
Yeah. Tian?
Tien.
Okay. So it's not related to the square, the heavenly square.
That's Tiananmen Square, I think is, I don't know, actually I don't know how to spell it. I remember watching that on the news when I was a kid. That's awful.
Yeah.
But
yeah, no, interesting stuff. I would love to hear more about that, to be honest. I don't know anything about what you were just talking about. I was always interested in that Socrates would talk about God instead of the gods, which I always thought was interesting. So
yeah,
It's like, hey, why is this guy talking about God instead of the gods? Like, isn't he an ancient pagan philosopher? So yeah. Anyway, but he was not the only one. So.
Well, the Bible teaches us that originally all men knew about the true God, the creator God, right? And then
and he also Socrates also spoke about an inner voice, so which is interesting, like an inner voice, like as a guide. So anyway,
I think what happened is that a lot of the pagan gods came into being as attempts to explain how the universe functioned. Like they didn't really know about the water cycle, for example, like we did. So, well, there must be a God, like basically like a machine that required operators is how they saw the universe to some extent. And that's why there's direct equivalencies between the gods, and not all the gods, but a lot of the gods, there's direct equivalencies between these different cultures. So that's one of the things that Plato actually talked about in the Timaeus and Critias Dialogues, particularly when he was talking about Athens, is, he said, they had their own names for these gods, but I'm giving you the Greek equivalents of them. The Greeks, they knew that whoever made this universe is outside of it. Of course, there were also Greeks that today we would consider philosophically closer to the atheists, where they believe that the universe came into existence on its own. And that was a debate that they were having. And a lot of these debates they would have in the open forums in the city, which is also one of the things that talks about in the Bible. It's like a cultural thing. That's probably where I think the modern equivalent of that would be like Twitter or YouTube, where we are right now. The idea of an open square for debating ideas. And that's also an aspect of Western culture, because other parts of the world, they don't, other cultures, they're against allowing you to debate ideas. Of course, our ruling class is also like that we have today. But I mean, we'll see what happens as far as that goes. It is very important to have debates and spectators of those debates and to exchange ideas. And even when, for a lot of the videos that I'm researching, most of the sources that I read are sources that you could consider hostile sources. Like they don't believe the way that I do. They're usually atheists, have a totally different worldview, different idea about origins. A lot of them will say BCE and CE instead of BC and AD, which I refuse to ever change. I think that's one of the stupidest things, because it's not like you're changing the actual dates of anything. You're just calling it something else because you're triggered and you don't want to say Christ. But it's everybody still knows what it is, or maybe not everybody, but like, okay, what you're saying, it's before the common era and common era. What is, if you're not talking about Jesus, what does the 1st century AD have in common with the 21st century that it doesn't have in common with, the 1st century, the century before BCE? A common era, what's in common? Because if you take Jesus out of it, 1st century AD is a lot more like 1st century BC.
Yeah, the whole thing is kind of silly.
It's so stupid.
Yeah.
If you're making up a new time scale, then that would be one thing to come up with your own naming conventions, but you're just renaming the existing time scale because you're triggered by it. So yeah, I mean, it's good to read, just reading all sorts of stuff for the videos here on this channel. I keep learning new things, and also just reading for fun. Like, you can learn a whole lot of stuff, even from hostile sources that wouldn't agree with you and maybe don't even like you in real life. You can still learn from those people, especially if you read a lot of different things and you kind of coordinate the information, see what overlaps. You can really arrive at some knowledge. So at any rate, I think that's all I got. If you want to add anything, or
no, I was just looking up the Greek philosopher that was like more, I guess, closer to atheism. I think would have been Epicurus. Was that the right one? I don't know.
Maybe. We could do a video on that separately.
Yeah,
I'd have to look
probably.
that up. There were similar debates, or so I heard, in ancient China over whether or not there was a creator or whether the universe was self-existing. I believe that the more dominant train of thought over there was that there is a creator, and worshiping that creator was part of one of the roles of the emperor. He had to go and do some ceremony at the Temple of Heaven. And we talked about some of this in the video about Lord Shang, or I think we did. Lord Shang was kind of, or maybe not him, but Emperor Ying Zhang, who was the follower of Lord Shang, who implemented his philosophy over the whole country. He
More like nihilism, right? Kind of approach.
Yeah, the Chinese legalism was very similar to what's going on in China right now today. Very brutal philosophy and all about power and control and focusing everybody's reverence towards the state, making sure they have no surplus, making everybody a servant of the state. And of course that guy also, yeah.
Sounds like Holland. No.
Well, there are a lot of forces, I mean, power attracts people that want power.
Did you know if we had elections here in Holland today, that 1 in 3 would vote for Geert Wilders?
I thought he'd already won.
Yeah, well, he got like 43 seats. Like, if there were like new polls, they're still trying to build a government, but the old party is like still double crossing through like the back door through the Senate. They're still trying to get this new law out anyway, spreading like all the asylum seekers all over the country. So yeah, so anyway, but if there were elections now, he would actually get 1/3 of all the votes, which is crazy. That hasn't happened in like, I don't know, over 50 years that a party has that many seats. So yeah. Anyways, yeah, we should probably cut it off before we start ranting about all the stuff that's happening. But yeah, no, it was an interesting topic, and I agree with you. We should definitely read more, and there's so much rich history and so much. But that was part of the reason we started this channel, right? So also to challenge ourselves to spend less time on playing games or social media, stuff like that. Yeah,
playing games.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Depends on the pizza.
Video games are a waste of time, but I still play them. But it is a waste.
Yeah, me too. I've been playing as well. Yeah.
You don't get much out of it, Like, actually, that's one of the reasons why Tolkien didn't finish writing everything that he wanted to do, was because he kept
he was on Elder Scrolls all the time.
No, but he played a lot of card games. There was
okay.
Yeah, so just another way to waste time, right? Like,
yeah,
like entertainment is the only person that benefits from the entertainment is you. But when you create something, depending on what it is, then you and others also benefit from it. So yeah, he let a lot of time get by him. Eventually, spoiler, I'm doing a video working on a topic about the life of J.R.R. Tolkien. He's my favorite author, and to some extent a mentor. But that's a thing for another time. So yeah, like you said, I think this has gone on enough. So if anybody has made it this far to the end, thank you for listening. And do leave us some feedback in the comment section below, because that is something that motivates us to actually make more videos when we get feedback. So
yeah, let us know where you're from if you're listening. I was curious to see where people are from. Just let me know.
Yep.
Curious to see how many U.S. versus Europe or Africa, Asia, etc. Anyways, all right, man.
Yep.
Appreciate it. See you in the next one.
Alrighty.
Deus homo factus est natura mirante, mundus renovatus est a Christo regnante. Gaudete, Christus est natus, ex Maria Virgine gaudete.